The challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a program called Challenge.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of faith. Nearly 60 years later, during these challenging times, we'll take a new look at our divisions, our connections, in a new program called Challenge 2.0. In last week's edition of Challenge 2.0, we reviewed how COVID infections are skyrocketing among farm workers. These men and women are considered essential workers, but access to basic safety measures, things such as hand cleaner, face masks, social distancing, are often unavailable. Today, we continue that discussion in Essential but Unprotected: Farm Workers and the Pandemic. So we're going to pick up the conversation where we left off last week. And again, we are very fortunate to have two people that are deeply immersed in the issue from personal experience and from advocacy work within the community of farm workers. We have Rosalinda Guillen, who is the leader of Community to Community and foodjustice.org, and Jose Ortiz from Catholic Community Services of Western Washington. Thank you both again for joining us again in this edition. Let's begin where we left off. We had seen a lot of focus on the COVID-19 pandemic in January, February, and especially March in major cities. Now it's just beginning to shift to those communities where there is a lot of farm worker activity, a lot of farm workers that are living and employed. Why is that, and just how bad is the spike in terms of the incidence of COVID?
You know, the counties that we're talking about, Yakima and now possibly Skagit, are counties that have a lot of agricultural workers, a lot of, but also a lot of Latinos in general. The majority of the population, I know in Skagit County, it's getting close to 30%, maybe even 40, 50%. Yakima, it's over 50%. So these are like brown counties, okay? Let's just say it that way. Mm-hmm. And now they're spiking because the harvests are starting and because there were no protections set in place to begin with. So now everybody's coming in late. I want to start out by saying, referencing Governor Inslee's press conference in Yakima yesterday, and some of the things I heard him say. That he said, somebody asked him about agricultural workers in Yakima County, and he said that the state has done what they could, that he made a proclamation, and he put out these emergency rules that for the most part, the employers are obeying or complying with, and they're changing their behavior to protect workers. But then also the most important thing he said, we did what we could. I wrote it down, because we have to have food on our table. So once again, right, they did what they could because we have to have food on our table and we have to protect the food system. So I have a couple of comments on that. First of all, in Yakima County, the majority of the production in Yakima County is apples and cherries, pears, tree fruit. That is not the food system. That is one component of the food system that, frankly, I think we could all live without a few apples for a little while, But it's more about the profit. It's about the money that's going to be made for the state by selling and exporting apples, cherries, and the rest of the tree fruit. That's what I think. They did what they did. It's not enough. The rules were not enough to truly protect farm workers. The farm workers know it's not enough, and they're striking. That's why there were strikes at the packing sheds.
13th day of strikes overall here in the Yakima Valley.
They're calling the state and they're calling labor and industries and saying the employers are not changing their behavior. They are continuing to function as business as usual. We're seeing it because they're on the ground. So we have been at the table, many of us, with the governor's staff, the decision makers from labor and industry and the Department of Health, giving them the recommendations necessary to protect farm workers during this pandemic, and we have been ignored. Mm-hmm. And I have to say disrespected, because the ultimate sign of that disrespect is a governor going to Yakima and not letting the Latino leadership or the farm worker community know he was coming. Nobody even knew he was going to be there. At the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic right now, where the majority of the labor force is agricultural. And yeah, there are some other workers, of course, but the majority are farm workers. So, the governor also said that the rules are complaint driven. So if you have complaints, people should complain because that's what Labor and Industries is there for. So people have been complaining to Labor and Industries, Jose, since you were, we know this. For generations have been complaining. Labor and Industries does not respond to farm workers' complaints. They don't have the funding for responding. They don't have the staff, and they said so on the record. They do not have sufficient staff to enforce the problems coming in through complaints, and that has not changed.
In terms of living in very close quarters, it has to be difficult, if not impossible, to maintain any sense of social distancing, and also the basics of masks and sanitizing. What's being provided? Do you see a difference between the managers of those plants and the workers? What's the reality there?
The reality is that, again, the structure of the system is built to get more workers into closer quarters. Everything is. The packing sheds, no air circulation, inside, body to body on the production lines. Mm-hmm. Dining rooms, if you're lucky enough to have a dining room where everybody's packed into it, the bathrooms, everything. The way the packing sheds are built is why the workers went on strike, is a perfect scenario for contagion. And it's happening. So, we had cases in some of these packing sheds where the supervisors were wearing N95 masks that are the best, handing out these cheap paper masks to the workers. And the workers are saying, why is your mask different than mine? We're both people. This virus is going to hit us both. Why can't I have one like yours? Mm-hmm. It's like, well, because these are the ones that are assigned to the workers. But why? How is this going to protect me? Things like this are happening. Yes, in some companies it's getting better. The governor put out these, rules, but nobody's enforcing the rules. So we've got that. The social distancing, when it comes to peak time of high production, supervisors and the employers don't care about social distancing. Just get the production done, and they just turn away. The workers know if we're going to meet the production demands that the boss is saying, we can't do it with this social distancing. Mm-hmm. So if they do the social distancing to protect themselves, they get retaliated and they get threatened with losing their jobs or lowering wages. So these are poor people, right? This is happening everywhere across agriculture. And the governor says the employers, for the most part, are changing their behavior. They're not changing their behavior. So, you can hand out gloves, you can hand out the masks, you can do all of that. You can say you're sanitizing, but it's not happening because it is not conducive to making the money that the industry needs to make to change them. So what's needed in agriculture is a huge restructuring of how work is done. And the employers are not willing to restructure because it's going to lower their profits. The Department of Health in Yakima has said they tried to meet with the employers to work with the employers and give them some guidance on protecting the workers. Over half, if not 3/4 of the employers never bothered with it. They never showed up. They don't want to hear it because that means they have to change their production standards and lower the production, which is going to cost them money. But I also want to make a very clear distinction here in Washington State agriculture today. There are two groups of workers that we're dealing with now. One is the farm workers like Jose and I, families that have been here for generations that are skilled labor force, that live in Washington State year-round, own their own homes, some of them if they're lucky. Their kids go to school here, go to church here, we're the consumers in these rural areas. And now we have, because the industry didn't want to deal with us, because we know our rights now, right? We speak English, we read English, we know our rights, we're demanding better wages, benefits. They decided to work towards bringing in contracted labor from Mexico, Mexican farm workers. And right now, last year, there were close to 30,000 workers from Mexico. These are these massive labor camps that the industry has created to house thousands of farm workers in one farm. I think Gebers in the Okanagan has labor camps that's up to 3,000 workers. This is where the danger lies with COVID-19.
I mean, it's nothing new. We lived it. We've been advocating for 30, 40 years, but I think our own experience of from the beginning as a little boy working out in the farms, I wasn't old enough to do a lot of the work that my relatives were doing because, it was just too hard and they had to help me. So a lot of times I was running or operating the tractors because I wasn't able to cut cauliflower or broccoli, for 8, 12 hours a day. So I couldn't do it without their help. But, I remember many times where they were spraying, pesticides over us. And the difference between a regular worker, a farm worker, and then you saw your crew bosses, and then you looked at the bosses, I don't like to use a lot of group words, I guess, but our counterparts are the white folks that were the crew bosses. They all had coveralls. I don't know if you remember that, Rosalinda.
Boots, really nice boots.
With
Yeah.
with their name on it, company
Yeah.
name, and here we were with with no boots, our socks being wet. I remember using for protection and keeping us as warm as possible, putting on plastic bags over our socks to try and keep our feet dry. We use garbage bags to keep ourselves dry, and we work no matter what in any condition. So you could see the differences. But looking at advocacy from 30 years ago, at least for me, but for others, I know it's been a lifetime. But just something that came up that really, really bothered me was that they're still dealing with not enough or not even water at all in some of the places in the fields where people were working. The honey bucket's not a place to go to the restroom, or having toilet paper. That came up. 30, 40 years, we're still going back to the same thing. But dealing with the COVID-19, it's here in our own community, finding out that our own parishioners are getting sick, that they couldn't leave their house because the whole family was sick. And then as you dig in, it was because somebody at a potato shed got sick and nobody was told about it. So other people got sick and then they went home like nothing else, like it's happened before with pesticides and everything. They bring the diseases into their own home, and now the whole families are affected by it. And with bringing all these issues to the governor and to the other departments, it was great that we created new guidelines, but what does it really mean when they don't have enough inspectors or enough staff? I think for ag workers, at least the ones that I know, there's probably only 2 to oversee all the ag, for the whole state. And then around housing, a lot of times they don't even know where the migrant housing is, because a lot of them were built without any permits, and there's still a lot of people living in barns or hidden away homes, or if you could call them home. But just a few years ago, we had several people got sick, and there's a person that passed away up in Sumas, and it was part of the guest workers. A lot of times, even so it goes in tiers, I guess, of knowing your rights, and the time that Rosalinda spends with the community. And we try to do the same, guiding the people and creating leadership among them, but also to teach them about their rights and how to protect themselves. But when you bring in the guest workers, they're just eager to come to work, like our family was. Where you might be making, I don't know how much money they make in Mexico, but maybe $1 a day, $1 an hour or less. And then they come here and make, $15 an hour or $14 an hour. There's a huge difference. How would they complain? And they never complain until they get sick or they pass away. And that was the whole thing that happened up in Sumas. I was upset the other day because I couldn't find my older girls, and I asked my wife where they were, and of course they were in Seattle at the protest, and they came back, and and I told them, you should have at least told me what you were doing. And she said, "Dad, you have taught us this since we were 4." And so that's, I guess, we continue to build leaders and activists within our community so they can take over the work that other people have begun.
Some of the conditions that you both elaborated and described so well, because those were not being addressed, because you saw the problems that you've discussed so much. Workers went on strike in the Yakima Valley because of that. What is the status of that, and what has been achieved so far?
I can report to that because Familias Unidas por la Justicia went immediately when they were called. Well, I think all of them have gone back to work now for many reasons. There's 7 packing sheds. Each packing shed had its own reason, its own history, but the same issues, right? Some of them went back because they couldn't sustain it. The workers, they're poor again. You can only last so long without a paycheck. Some of them went back because they were able to force the employer to some agreements of raising wages, providing protections. And they're in the process right now of looking to form their own association to continue to defend themselves and have some protections. Now, what I've heard is that the workers that have gone back, it's still tough inside. I mean, even now, even after the strikes, they're still having to fight for the gloves and the masks and the social distancing. They have a little bit more leverage now because the employer knows that they're going to walk out if they don't like listen to them. And also the harvests are coming, so they have to be ready for that. It's still not where it should be. And I think that the changes that need to happen have to be much deeper and bigger in order for workers to be protected. And I think, the governor going to Yakima and trying to say that it's being taken care of is just wrong. It isn't. Mm-hmm. I want to ask whoever's viewing this, that what we're demanding is a complete restructuring of labor and industries, a complete restructuring of the Department of Health and how they enforce worker protections in agriculture. It's got to be totally taken down, assessed, and restructured so that farm workers have total access and input into every aspect of everything that has to do with farm labor in agriculture today, right?
For people that are watching, people that are listening, what can they do to help make the needed changes happen? And is there a difference between what could be termed bad actors and good actors in the field that perhaps by their purchasing power that maybe they could help accelerate some of these changes? What's your response to that?
Well, we've tried that. We've tried that. It works for one company, for one crop. We need systemic change here. I think that I want to ask people to, number one, is demand the Department of Labor and Industries be restructured, that the Department of Health have a specific department that deals more fundamentally with farm worker health, especially in this whole thing about quarantining and testing. Especially right now, the calls to the governor, labor and industries, and the Department of Health is increase testing in the farm worker community that's working in the fields. Focus on increasing the testing and then make those numbers public. Be very, very public about how many workers are testing positive and where are they? What communities are they in? What farms are they in? And then what was the enforcement mechanism taken? And what was the health care mechanism used to care for those workers, to quarantine them, to provide the support that the family's going to need? Look at David Cruz died. He was one of the strikers at Allen Brothers. His whole family was infected. His whole family was positive and sick, right? So what is the health department? There's got to be a very specific funding, personnel. If a farm worker becomes ill in the fields, what happens to his family? Have they been exposed? They're all going to need support to cover medical costs, to cover, living, paying rent, eating, and all that, because their main, income provider just died, and now they're sick. They can't work, and they're already poor to begin with.
We're thinking and talking about your regular ag workers that might be here, with the proper documents, but most of our brothers and sisters that work in the fields, they're undocumented. So one of the issues that we've been advocating and fighting for, they pay all the your Social Security, your unemployment, and all of this different insurances. But when it comes back to collecting, like Rosalinda was saying, we have multiple families and many people that were unemployed and that couldn't work because of the COVID-19 or because of different things. All of those folks don't qualify for rental assistance or anything in between. They don't have they're essential workers, but they don't have any of those rights like we do. So that's another situation that we're, dealing with on a daily basis, just trying to get them food. I mean, I don't want to even mention or promise anything that I'm not able to help with, or that I don't have any control. I'm doing my best I can to provide them with masks and food and a little bit of advocacy. But our situation is worse than I've ever seen in my lifetime.
Jose, I've got another question for you.
Yeah.
And that is, in your perspective, what are things working with the groups that you work with? And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about the youth group you work with. You've got the T-shirt on.
Sure.
What are some things people can do to become, number one, more aware of the issues and can become involved to actually lead to some progress on these issues?
So I really believe, people mention that a picture tells 100 words or 1,000 words describes it better. But or walk in my shoes, we've heard all those different things before. I always says, come and see. So, I know that sometimes it's hard for us to come into a community, to cross the border, to see things for ourselves. And in my own experience, with the caravans and, just feeling uncomfortable and going into other places, it's always a learning experience and it's very rewarding. So my idea has always been, come and see, come and visit us, do go out with us to the migrant camps, come and help us at the food bank, come and experience it for yourself, and then, capture your own ideas. And by your own experience, you'll be moved, but you will also be changed, because we have a different world just an hour away from Seattle. It's we every time we have people come into our community, it's for the festivals, it's for the mountains, for the Tulip Festival. But we might drive by a migrant camp and we don't have an idea. We see the farm workers working out in the fields. We take pictures of them and everything looks beautiful, but we haven't taken the time to look into people's lives, to listen to a farm worker. I'm able to put those experiences together, and I would love to be able to continue to do that. I think we could gain so much. There's so many beautiful people out there that want to make a difference, and I've been a bridge builder for about 30 years. Through groups that I've been involved with, but also through the Youth Migrant Projects, where we have kids, youth groups that come from all over the archdiocese. They spend a week at a time with us, experience the life of the poor, the life of the farm workers, helping, also learning where food comes from. Many kids, like my own kids, they have never been out in the fields, picking your own strawberries, your raspberries, digging up potatoes. It's a beautiful experience that kids and adults get to learn about, and be able to smell, to touch, and using all your senses. And that's what I got to offer, a course to learn about advocacy through the work that we do.
Where are some sources of information that you might suggest they turn to? Rosalinda, I know you have a website. Can you just briefly tell us about that before we sign off?
Yes, folks should go to foodjustice.org. Also, a lot of our policy documents are actually being produced with us by Columbia Legal Services. So go to Columbia Legal Services. They have a lot of the technical policy language of what we're looking for in terms of changes. Those are good places to go. This pandemic, some of the changes that we're asking in this pandemic, there isn't really, we haven't really posted a lot of the documentation for that. So what I would like to ask folks to do is stay updated with the actions that Familias Unidas por la Justicia is going to take. Attend the Agricultural Seasonal Worker Services Committee, where a lot of these issues are going to be debated at the policy level and where policy is going to be created. I also would like to ask people to think about, it's easier to donate food and masks and all of those essentials that are needed. The tougher part is the restructuring of the system so that we don't have to come back here again. So I think folks need to stay updated with community to community, with Familias Unidas por la Justicia, because this is a process happening now. And it needs drastic change, because it's exhausting to try to survive and to help our community survive.
We don't want to have to come back here in terms of facing the same problem time after time, but I want both of you to know that you have an open invitation, number one, to keep us informed about this and to come back on this program and update us on what is happening and what needs to happen. So Jose and Rosalinda, I thank you both so much for joining us, and I thank all of you out there watching this episode of Challenge 2.0. We hope you'll tune in again next week. Thank you very much.